the investigation into Hillary's email server, her use of a private email server to communicate classified information. It's known that Barack Obama communicated with Hillary Clinton on this private email server, and this is a felony. Mishandling of classified information, top secret information, compartmentalized information as Secretary of State was felony. Destroying the evidence of that mishandling is a felony. Wiping servers to prevent any investigation is felony. And it's not a felony, but it's just ridiculous for the DNC and for the Clinton campaign to claim that they were hacked by Russians and then not allow investigators access to those servers. Instead, relying on CrowdStrike, a private company and heavily Democrat-leaning company with a close relationship with the Clintons to independently verify that it was in fact Russia that hacked their servers. So many people, and understandably so, have become disenfranchised, disheartened, and frustrated with how slow the wheels of justice are moving in regard to this investigation. So it was opened, closed again by James Comey. James Comey has since been fired, along with plenty of other people in the FBI and DOJ. So if this level of corruption within the DOJ and FBI is to be exposed, it has to be exposed in a way that permits prosecution. So you couldn't necessarily rely on the mafia or some organized crime syndicate to investigate and be forthright with the results of its investigation and then charge members of its own organization. It's the same thing with the DOJ and FBI. These are the organizations that we entrust to provide oversight for federal investigation and prosecution in the United States. So justice can't be carried out by these organizations until these organizations have been cleansed of the corrupt actors and political appointees at the top. So rather than rely on the criminals to prosecute themselves, we have to phase out those corrupt individuals. So this is what's been happening. Many people have, as I said, understandably grown frustrated with this process. It's been, let's see, going on 2 years now since Hillary Clinton committed a series of felonies, was not charged, usurped Bernie Sanders with the help of the DNC to gain the nomination, and then lost the presidential race to Donald Trump, much to the dismay of all of those who got behind Bernie, thinking that this time it was different. This time we have a change candidate who might actually endeavor to change things. But as we see, Bernie Sanders was in effect a carrot on a stick dangled out in front of young voters. Those young voters sent in their contributions. They made donations to the DNC. The DNC was actively conspiring against Bernie Sanders throughout that election. And if you go and read the WikiLeaks emails, you can see this in real time. They were talking about outing him for his Jewish heritage, outing him for his atheism, to make him less appealing, let's say, to evangelical voters. So Bernie Sanders was bait for young voters who wanted no college tuition. They want socialized medicine. They want socialism for the most part because they think socialism simply means sharing. Anyone who's looked at the last, 100 years can see that socialism does not mean sharing. Socialism means an increasing divide between the rich and the poor, where the haves become ever smaller and the have-nots become ever larger. This leads to poverty, famine, destruction of society generally. It always ends in bloodshed, and there is not an exception to this rule. Socialism kills. So with regard to this investigation, John Huber, an attorney from outside D.C., Utah specifically, has been working in collaboration with Jeff Sessions, who recused himself from the Russia investigation. John Huber's task is to investigate the investigators, those who opened and closed Hillary's email investigation, those who submitted the dossier for the FISA warrant to surveil the Trump campaign, and those who opened the subsequent Russian collusion, Russian hacking, whatever it's being called, investigation that then charged special counsel leader Robert Mueller, overseen by Rod Rosenstein, to find collusion or foreign interference on behalf of the Russian government into the 2016 election. We'll see what he finds. So far, he found about $3,000 worth of spending on Twitter and Facebook ads and indicted 13 Russians, which will never see court. There was a challenge, a legal challenge, to Robert Mueller's special counsel from one of these Russians named in an indictment to present the evidence against him. You can guess where that went. Nope, we don't want to press charges. So the following individuals have been fired and or removed from their positions in the FBI and DOJ. This isn't an exhaustive list, but these are the major players in and around this investigation at the time it was opened and subsequently closed. From the FBI, James Comey, Andrew McCabe, Jim Rabicki, James Baker, Bill Priestap, Peter Strzok, Lisa Page, Mike Cortan, Josh Campbell. From the Department of Justice, David Laufman, John Carlin, Sally Yates, Mary McCord, and Rachel Brandt. I think soon to come will be Bruce Orr, whose wife was working with Fusion GPS, and I'll just touch it briefly. The DNC paid a law firm to pay an opposition research firm to pay a FBI asset who works for MI6 in the UK to compile a dossier using anonymous Russian sources that would implicate President Trump or members of his campaign in a collusion scheme. If they can show a connection between Trump or those close to him and the Russians, it bolsters the narrative that Trump colluded with the Russians to hack the DNC, rig the election. So the DNC paid for information from an anonymous source through several proxies. That information was used to obtain a warrant from the FISC, Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, to surveil the Trump campaign through Carter Page. This is concerning for a number of reasons, and I think I've actually gotten more into the FISA on a different video, and I'd encourage you to check that out or do some reading for yourself. This secret court is sort of a touchy subject in light of the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution. You should have the right to privacy, and you should have the right to face your accusers. If we can use anonymous, bought and paid for politically motivated dossiers to spy on U.S. citizens, particularly presidential candidates, it would seem that this is a misuse or perhaps an abuse of power that we granted to the federal government to ensure that we are not the subject of terrorist attacks, which is the original intent of this legislation. So there are a number of roadblocks in the way of those who seek to pursue justice, let's say, in regard to the DOJ and FBI and their actions in 2015, 2016. The makeup of the courts needs to be addressed. Political activism from the bench, legislating from the bench, think the Ninth Circuit Court or the D.C. Appeals Court, a court of appeals. If arrests are going to be made that result in charges against the targets, the judges who preside over these cases need to be impartial in their judgment. They can't be politically motivated. They can't be ideologically motivated. They need to rule in a manner that is free of any type of obstruction for any reason. Judges need to be fair and impartial, and they need to avoid even the perception of impropriety. A total of 93 attorneys general are employed within the Department of Justice. As of August 28, 2016, President Trump had nominated 78 people to be U.S. attorneys, and 69 or 75% of them had been confirmed. Just last week, with the confirmation of Judge Kavanaugh, the Supreme Court has been tilted in favor of the conservative side, or the constitutional, logic, reason-oriented side. This is another thing I've talked at length about, at least in the live streams, maybe not on here, but the hemispheric specialization of the brain. So people who tend to rely on the right brain, the threat detection center, the creative mind, are also going to be drawn to emotionally charged arguments or statements. If I can paint a picture that evokes fear or some other emotion, I can grab your attention, and you're more likely to follow that line of reasoning simply because of the dominant portion of your thinking. And by the inverse, those who are left brain oriented, those who are more driven by logic, reason, evidence, I suppose you could say. Obviously, I'm biased in one direction, but Jonathan Haidt has a pretty accurate analogy for this, and it's the elephant and the rider. The elephant's immensely powerful, and it can get moving in a particular direction. And it's the responsibility of the rider to steer that elephant toward an ideal outcome. So you can think of the elephant as the right side, the emotion-oriented brain, and the rider, the portion whose charge it is to steer the emotional side of the brain, that would be the left brain, the rider. So the imminent retirement, I guess this is just opinion basically, but Ruth Bader Ginsburg is falling asleep on the bench. She's known to be an alcoholic. She's getting up there in years. I don't think it's mean to say that. It's simply an observation. So it's looking like she is going to be retiring. If the president is not assassinated before the end of his first term by these radicals who are being stoked by this media, I think it's likely he wins a second term. And if Ginsburg retires within the next 6 years, there is a possibility that President Trump will get to nominate and potentially have confirmed another Supreme Court justice. That tilts it heavily on the conservative side, and that's a whole other set of problems, you could say. I don't think that the conservatives have it right. I don't think that the progressives have it right. I don't think libertarians have it right. I think it's somewhere in the middle, the Aristotelian mean. There's an optimal amount of government, I guess. This is where I would have a difference with the libertarian-minded. So it could be a good thing. It could be a bad thing. Do I want a fully ordered, ossified, patriarchal society? Of course not. Do I think that there is value in maintaining the existing order and making minor changes to the governmental structure or social structure? Yes. But I can't go radically one way or the other. So the next roadblock is going to be the process by which these criminals are brought to justice. So it's important to understand military and criminal law and the differences between them, specifically the treatment of those identified as enemy combatants. This designation is also referred to as unlawful combatants. It gives detainees fewer rights or absolves them of the rights and protections guaranteed to U.S. citizens. You may recall around 2009 legislation from Barack Obama related to prisoners at Guantanamo Bay. So these were enemy combatants. They were not necessarily state-sponsored troops, and so it's a gray area within the Geneva Convention. If they are in fact opposing U.S. forces on the ground during wartime, which we've been under the same declaration of war since 2001, they are going to be treated as enemy combatants, and they can be detained indefinitely without trial, which is, thanks a lot, President Bush. So the Third Geneva Convention rights that are typically conferred on prisoners do not apply to those who aid, abet, shelter the enemy during wartime. So anyone who engages in hostilities for an enemy state or a non-state entity can be determined to be an enemy combatant. It's worth noting that Senator Lindsey Graham's line of questioning in the confirmation process of Judge Kavanaugh focused specifically on this. He clarifies that the U.S. is at war and has been at war since 2001. He then distinguishes between the law of armed conflict and criminal law by citing Johnson v. Eisentrager. And he does this to clarify what is meant by, quote, enemy combatant, end quote, in the context of the law, and identifies the punishment for treason against the U.S. during wartime, which is death, and people have been executed. There's precedent for this. Graham states, quote, so if anybody doubts there's a long-standing tradition, history in this country, that your constitutional rights follow you wherever you go. but you don't have a constitutional right to turn on your own government and collaborate with the enemy of the nation. You'll be treated differently." End quote. Following this statement, he then points to Hamdi versus Rumsfeld to further clarify the point that U.S. citizens may be tried as enemy combatants and they forfeit the rights and protections guaranteed to U.S. citizens in the Bill of Rights and Constitution. So the next blockade in pursuit of justice here is going to be the special counsel, and I know that's what everyone wants to hear on both sides. Enter Robert Mueller. He has the authority to take into evidence anything related to foreign interference in the 2016 election. So if you look at the sequence of events and the information as I've laid it out here, there was in fact interference in the 2016 election, but it doesn't appear to have been on behalf of the Trump campaign or the Trump administration as it has manifest. So the foreign interference appears to have been on behalf of the Clinton campaign via Fusion GPS, via Perkins Coie, via CrowdStrike, via the United Kingdom government and their intelligence apparatus, MI6, this agent Christopher Steele, who compiled the dossier. This is clearly intended to influence the outcome of the election. If they intend to use this dossier to present it to the FBI, have the FBI present this dossier to the FISA court to obtain a warrant to surveil the Trump campaign, this is clearly intended to influence the outcome of the election. And further, Christopher Steele used Russian sources to compile this dossier. So there's your Russian interference if you're looking for it. Another component to this is the Five Eyes surveillance network. So Canada, the United States, New Zealand, Australia, and the United Kingdom have a information sharing agreement called the Five Eyes surveillance network. They can share intelligence across national boundaries. This creates a paper trail. If I submit a request for documents, if I submit a request for human intelligence, signals intelligence, something like that, it creates a paper trail. But if I don't submit that request, if I instead go directly to New Zealand, for example, or directly to Australia, I can access that information without creating a paper trail if I'm accessing it in person. So this is a way to circumvent the paper trail that's created by the Five Eyes surveillance network while still accessing the information you desire. So the Five Eyes surveillance network, look at the scheduled stops that Barack Obama made during the 2016 election between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. Look at the stops that Hillary Clinton made during that same time period and following the election. So if Robert Mueller takes in evidence related to this collusion, then it can't be subpoenaed, right? No one would have access to this information because it's part of an ongoing investigation. This is awfully convenient depending on your perspective and who you think is actually guilty in all of this, let's say. This special counsel investigation provides time, cover, and fundraising opportunities for those who oppose the president's current agenda. What that agenda is, it seems to be largely focused on human trafficking, corruption, child trafficking specifically, border security, taxation, regulation, and America being beholden to extra-governmental organizations and asymmetric trade deals, trade agreements like NAFTA, which was recently negotiated with both Canada and Mexico quite successfully by the president, trade with China, asymmetrical trade deals that have existed for decades with China. These things are being renegotiated, and the extra-governmental organizations like the United Nations, the UN Human Rights Council, these organizations that have countries that objectively abuse their citizens, who objectively engage in human rights violations, who are on the Human Rights Council, along with the United States, which name a country that does not assault human rights. And then look at this list of characters who are on this UN Human Rights Council. It's a farce. And look no further if you want to see real world consequences for participation in these extra-governmental organizations, the European Union is in disarray. Brexit, Grexit, Frexit, all of these countries are endeavoring to get out of the European Union because the European Union imposed quotas on them for the number of refugees they were going to be taking from Africa. So these economic migrants come through their countries and go to the countries that offer the best benefits package in terms of welfare. They settle into these communities, start having children, and they are not paying into a system, rather they are consuming from these systems. And so the citizens, the taxpayers, have grown understandably discontented with this process as they see they are being displaced as a population, and they're also paying for their own displacement. So we're seeing a rise in nationalism, a rise in populism as a result of this, and many of these countries are focused, it seems, on getting out of the European Union and getting out of all of these globalist organizations that can dictate countries' policy regardless of the wills of the voters, the will of the taxpayers, the will of the citizens. This is concerning for a number of reasons. So declassification through presidential authority is the only way that the public, that, well, what's left of journalists and the media will be able to access this information that is being withheld due to the ongoing investigation conducted by the special counsel. Exposing the true purpose of the special counsel, if in fact this is what I've laid out, this is going to result in the termination of Rod Rosenstein and Robert Mueller. So Jeff Sessions has been awfully quiet. Jeff Sessions has been dressed up as an enemy of Trump. The president has tweeted at Jeff Sessions, sleepy Jeff, inept Jeff, when are you going to do your job? Something needs to be done here. I don't want to have to do it by executive order. So Jeff Sessions has the authority to fire individuals within the FBI and DOJ. The Attorney General oversees the judicial branch. So Jeff Sessions' confirmation vote was right along party lines. I don't think that's any coincidence, but 52-47, with only one Democrat, Joe Manchin III, voting in the affirmative. And this is not to say that only Democrats should fear transparency. Only Democrats have something to lose with this crackdown on human smuggling, drug trafficking, weapon trafficking, porous borders, sanctuary cities. This is not to say that only Democrats benefit from those things, because there are pretty clearly people on both sides of the aisle who benefit from the status quo, who benefit from a continual flow of drugs into the United States, who benefit from being able to move money with nonprofit organizations, from being able to open charities in their own name and take what we would call political bribes in exchange for favors, preferential treatment, and access to politicians. If you make a $100,000 donation to the Ben Foundation, I can get you a meeting with so-and-so, or I might be able to give you access to privileged information that can help you place your bets, so to speak, in the stock market because you have an inside track on what's going on. It's insider trading, but it's done under the guise of charity and nonprofits. So Jeff Sessions' confirmation vote, I just mean that to illustrate the opposition to his confirmation. And this is coming from both sides, but it just happened to come right down party lines. Andrew McCabe, the former deputy to James Comey and one of the individuals at the center of this corruption. So Andrew McCabe was right underneath James Comey. Andrew McCabe oversaw Peter Strzok's investigation into Hillary's email server, and if you've been following the news, you've seen the exchanges between Peter Strzok and the woman he was having an affair with, an attorney for the FBI, Lisa Page. Their texts back and forth about how they were going to ensure that Trump doesn't become president, and that they needed to hurry up and get this investigation done, that the president, Barack Obama, wanted daily updates on the progress of this investigation because clearly Barack Obama had a lot of eggs in the Hillary basket as well. A lot of money had come in, and whether it's related or not, I think it's related. This is my opinion, but We made billions and billions of dollars in cash payments to Iran following Hillary Clinton's loss in that election. So whether this was restitution for all of the oil money and warlord money and dictator money that poured into the Clinton Foundation and the McCain Institute and Barack Obama's nonprofit, whether these are in effect refunds, I can't say for sure. I think someone would have to really dive in and follow that money to determine that. But James Comey has been fired. Andrew McCabe has been fired. Peter Strzok has been fired. All of the individuals in this investigation, conducting this investigation, and around this investigation have been fired or removed from power. Many of them, James Baker, for example, just testified last week. Many of them are cooperating witnesses now in an ongoing investigation led by Jeff Sessions and John Huber in Utah. So there was a perjury investigation launched just prior to Jeff Sessions' confirmation. It mirrors in many regards Roy Moore's election, Judge Kavanaugh's election, and now this one from the past. But conveniently timed accusations that need some sort of investigation to delay the vote, to delay the confirmation. Maybe these are just political stunts. Maybe these are grasps for power. Maybe it's just the rap and smear like Nancy Pelosi discussed. Whatever it is, it's a repetitive pattern. So that accusation ultimately resulted in Jeff Sessions' recusal to prevent, once again, the perception of impropriety from the Russia investigation, and the appointment of Rod Rosenstein and Robert Mueller. This was a cause-effect sort of situation here. So these are the roadblocks. These are the hurdles that need to be overcome. And it's understandable that people have grown impatient and will grow impatient if they haven't already with the speed at which justice moves in America, particularly if you want things done by the book, if you want things done in accordance with the law, in accordance with the Constitution. Things have to be done very, very surgically. Very wasn't necessary there. Things need to be done surgically. When you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, but this sort of problem requires a scalpel, if that makes sense. So declassification, not just of the FISA, but all documents that are being requested by Congress and by the Senate Intelligence Committee, can and will lead to an end to this farce. And hopefully the president is, well, it's likely the president has considered this. And as the media paints Robert Mueller and Rod Rosenstein and Jeff Sessions as enemies of Trump, and Trump plays with that as well on Twitter to make it look like these people are opposed to him, it's garnering support. It's lending legitimacy, credibility to these individuals. And if what I suspect is going to happen happens, when these indictments really, really ramp up, when charges start to be filed, when we see the result of these years of surgical precision start to come out, the media, all of these people who have sided with those individuals, will they instantly flip and say, oh, actually, we were lying about this person's credibility? Or will they have to say, well, yes, it looks like this investigation was conducted ethically and appropriately and in accordance with the law, and it looks like everyone from Peter Strzok and Lisa Page to Barack Hussein Obama and Hillary Clinton are going to prison. We'll see. Please share this video with anyone you think might get some value out of it. Like and subscribe. If you enjoy this content, let me know. If you have questions, let me know. I'm happy to answer them. We'll see you.